at least they didn't debase themselves by saying "bing it" yet. You know, at least nobody is binging things.
Welcome to another episode of Nerd Legion. After the tragedy that was the ending of Ahsoka, Doa has dragged me back into the MCU with Loki season 2. Why do you do this to me?
Because we're going off the rails on this Loki train, Monty. That's what we're doing apparently this week. Now,
I actually thought it was pretty good, to be fair.
I honestly enjoyed the first couple episodes as well. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy the whole series. We've been proven time and time again that just because the first couple episodes give us hope doesn't mean that there's any hope for the series overall. A big difference between us in this particular case, there are many obviously, but in this particular one, the difference is that I watched Loki season 1. You didn't. This was in your pre-Disney Plus era, I'd like to call it. Before we started the show, you didn't really watch anything on Disney Plus. I can't blame you, but you're here now. You're not going to go and catch up. You're just going to go in cold. And so I'm curious about your take on this, not seeing Loki season 1. Now, I will say I thought Loki season 1 was okay. This, of course, is where they introduced Kang the Conqueror into the MCU. They had him, the first Kang we see anyway, be sort of this guy that had decided the only way to prevent a multiversal war was to make only one pure timeline because he knew other versions of himself from other timelines would cause a bunch of trouble. So he was basically like, yeah, I mean, we're pruning all the other timelines, which now we know is resulting in the deaths of a lot of people, but we're preventing this big multiversal war. So you make the choice. They kill him, which of course lets the big multiverse branching happen, which of course now is theoretically going to lead into many Kangs, causing many problems for many people. But I guess we're okay with that. And here we are in Loki season 2.
So I did read a summary and I watched a summary of season 1, but I do have to say, Doa, that this show already does so much of a better job of introducing the audience to what is going on and being a comprehensively told story for people who haven't seen it all, unlike Ahsoka that just assumed that I had seen Rebels and Clone Wars and so lacked explanation, lacked emotional resonance, all of those factors. I jumped into season 2 of this show and immediately understood what was going on and immediately had a good time. So I don't know why this is so goddamn hard for other people to do, but this felt very self-contained. And even if you didn't see season 1 with some very light research, you can jump into this season and be entertained, which I very much appreciated.
Yeah, I actually was thinking the same thing after the Ahsoka debacle, where as I was watching, especially episode 1, I was like, they're doing a job of incorporating the catch-up for people into just the plot of the episode, you know, and it felt like a very organic thing, right? Where we come into it with the TVA, which I can't remember what that stands for anymore. The Time
Variance Authority.
Time Variance Authority. Okay, right. It was on the tip of my tongue. No, it wasn't. I didn't remember that at all. But anyway, we come into a TVA that is in disarray. Obviously, their whole mission was to preserve the sacred timeline, and now there's a faction that thinks they still should. There's a faction that's kind of realized what's happened, and Loki is and Mobius are kind of thrust in the middle of it.
Yeah, and the characters' motivations are really easy to grasp right from the get-go. You understand why they're doing what they're doing, their goals. You get to see them executing on those objectives. The casting in this show is insanely good. All the actors really just nail their parts. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Tom Hiddleston in general, not only from Loki, but from films.
On Skull Island?
No, I haven't seen that, but Only Lovers Only Lovers Left Alive is a very big favorite film of mine, Jim Jarmusch film. Yeah, that's not surprising. So I love him in that movie as well, where he stars with Tilda Swinton. So he really nails the role of Loki. He always has through all of the Marvel movies. He's been one of the most fun actors, I think, to watch in the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And Owen Wilson is like surprisingly great in this as well. The trouble with Owen Wilson is he kind of only plays one character, but if you need that character in a movie, then he's really great. And I think he does an excellent job of being this kind of earnest airhead of Mobius.
Sure. Well, I mean, he's kind of he's kind of the everyman, right? He's sort of like the guy who's just committed to his job. He's got dreams that aren't really all that big. He just wants to ride a jet ski, basically, is his dream. He kind of strives to have everyone just get along as they try to do their job. And yeah, his kind of like perpetually low key sort of demeanor with everything is it works really well in this series, So I mean, we all, loved him as Hansel and Zoolander all those years ago, of course. But I think he's doing a pretty good job today too, being Mobius at this point.
Yeah, the casting, as I understand, Ke Huy Quan wasn't in previous seasons as Ouroboros, but he is so funny, and the scenes that are in, and we'll get into the scenes that he's in, are just hilarious, even if you have no background to this film at all. And the other thing about Owen Wilson is that the aesthetic, especially of the TVA, is so reminiscent of a Wes Anderson movie. Like the stages are so really, really, really well designed. It's beautiful to look at, not only in terms of cinematography, but just the costume and set design is so great in this show.
Well, the way they shot episode 1 too is in a very unique kind of way, because almost every single shot in episode 1 was a slow zoom in on whatever was happening. Mm-hmm. And it that felt a little bit I'm not a huge Wes Anderson fan, but that felt a little bit in that vein, but also felt a little bit, I don't know what it reminded me of. I know I've seen that somewhere, and I feel like it's been a while since I've seen that kind of thing, but it added this sort of like tension to every kind of shot, right? Where it's like it feels like we're zooming in because characters are kind of figuring things out bit by bit in every little scene. And so, as we're sort of zooming in on the subject of every shot, they're sort of kind of zooming in on, what they, not just what they want to accomplish, but figuring out what they need to accomplish to begin with, right? And I just, I enjoyed that. The feeling that it gave me watching kind of every shot in that first episode. I was disappointed we didn't get as much of it in episode 2, but I thought that was a really interesting way for them to, lead off that season.
Yeah, and it's just the colors that are in these sets and the way that you get these very kind of like broad shots. It really is reminiscent of Wes Anderson. And the fact that Owen Wilson is in this TV series is also immediately reminiscent of Wes Anderson, considering how... So when I was watching this, I was like, oh, it's Owen Wilson in another Wes Anderson film.
Where's Bill Murray?
So, yeah, I think it's like, it's very... There's a huge amount of a nod here to Wes Anderson films, but it really, really works, especially because so many of Wes Anderson of his films kind of take place in the 50s, 60s era. And you kind of get that same feel from the way that they've constructed the TVA and the interior and the sets and everything like that. And the technology that they're using is very analog, but it is really a beautiful show to look at.
Yeah, and the way that it's constructed too visually makes everything feel a little bit off, right? There's a certain sort of like, non-aggressive look to everything with a lot of very like muted colors, round shapes, all that kind of stuff. Everything looks very non-aggressive, but then what's happening here, the pruning of timelines, theoretically the highest body count of any Marvel piece of media ever, right? You've got billions, trillions of people dying in these timelines. But yet everything is shot in such a muted way that I find everything to be off-putting, and I like it when the way something is shot and presented makes me a little bit uncomfortable, I like when it always seems like there's something a little bit off, a little bit not right, which, goes along with the show too, because everyone in the TVA was essentially kidnapped, right? They were all variants and their memories were wiped and they're working here. So, there's that sort of off-putting nature to it too, that all of these people have been kind of, been enslaved, for lack of a better term, right? Kidnapped and then forced to work at this agency and kind of led to believe that they're doing something grand where really they're kind of committing genocide constantly. So beneath the very sort of passive veneer of everything, there's like very sinister stuff going on, which I find is a neat aspect to it.
Yeah. So, this is, I really enjoyed this, especially the first episode of this show. I think it set up like Loki's predicament of slipping between various timelines within the TVA really well. It set up the stakes extremely well for what was going on. They gave the characters enough time to really enjoy the scenes and have some very clever dialogue and banter, particularly when Loki and Mobius meet Ouroboros in the basement, and you have these like long back and forths. And I just love the pacing of that scene because, basically Loki is going back in time to talk to a previous version of Ouroboros, which is altering Ouroboros's present while he's talking to Mobius, Owen Wilson's character. And Ke Huy Quan just absolutely nails this scene.
Is he talking to you in the past and you're just now remembering it?
Wow, that makes perfect sense. There's no flaw in that logic.
He's a very quirky actor, as we know from his, especially obviously recently, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and the character that he played in that. But you can really see on his face the gears turning as he's suddenly remembering things as Loki slips in time and tells him information for the past about how they can deal with the predicament in the present. And his nonchalant, very practical responses to everything play so well with Owen Wilson's horror at losing all of his skin, potentially, when they try and pull Loki out of all of the timelines. And he explains to Loki the existential horror if this doesn't go right and that it has to be done now. It's three wonderful actors just absolutely nailing their roles. And the writing is just hilarious. Like, it's just so deadpan, dry, and funny that I truly enjoyed that interaction being most of what we've seen so far.
Not too bad if you're quick about it.
Gotta be quick about it.
But if you spend too long in it, that kind of temple energy will peel the skin right off you.
Wait, I thought you said not too bad, and now you're talking about me getting my skin peeled off of me?
I like that they appear to follow the same time travel rules as Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure too, where it's like if you want something changed in the present, you just have to change it in the past, and it's like you just kind of have to think of it in the present and then remember to go back in the past and do it later, Like in Bill and Ted when he's thinking like what garbage can, this is garbage can comes down over his dad, right? So they can sneak through the jail, right? So he told himself to remember that so they could go back in time later after they'd gotten through this predicament. But how could they get through this predicament if he didn't go back in time and do that? Yeah, exactly. But this kind of follows similar time travel rules, which is fun. And whenever there's time travel involved, I like there to be rules established and then adhered to. Nothing is worse than a time travel story that disregards its own rules. Those rules can be whatever you want them to be. You just have to stick to them. And I think that first episode did a good job with that. And I think overall the series is doing a pretty decent job with creating rules and then sticking to them, because that makes a fun time travel story experience.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And it honestly, I think this is also the most fun way to do time travel overall, because it creates these really great comedic moments, right?
Yeah.
Like you're talking about in Bill and Ted, and like you're talking about with this one, there's no way you can make time travel logically make sense, which is why I prefer when they just don't try and explain it whatsoever. I think the most hilarious example of this in movies is in Looper, when Bruce Willis basically is I
only saw that once a long time ago.
Okay, so in Looper what happens is that Bruce Willis basically just he just says, we're not going to talk about this because we'd spend all day making diagrams with straws, and then they just ignore it for the rest of the movie. Because it's another one of those films where if you go back and change something in the past that affects the present, like when he's cutting off all the body parts, from the past, and it's affecting the present. Anyway, it's a great movie. It's a great movie. But it's another one that follows these similar rules and also just very point blank refuses to engage with the logic of it.
That's fine. I mean, I think that's what, like you said, that's kind of what you have to do to have a good time travel story. You just write your own rules to it and then stick to those rules, Yep.
So it's working. It's working really well for me so far. And I think that the broader plot that is being developed here also makes a lot of sense, that there is a conspiracy around the creation of the time variance authorities, from the timekeepers being the fake front of the leadership of the TVA, when it's revealed that He Who Remains actually created this. Ostensibly, we don't really know if his goals were noble or not, or if it was just because this iteration of Jonathan Major's character wants to be in control or wants to be the only existing iteration of him. So I like the fact that we have these very murky origins to the TVA that the main characters are trying to suss out and figure out what is actually going on and the reasons why this was created.
Yeah. I'm trying to, I did watch Ant-Man and Wasp Quantumania because that did also involve Kang the Conqueror, but I don't really remember much of what happened. It wasn't very good. So, I don't really have anything to add there, but I think the idea of his character is much more interesting in this context than whatever it was in that movie. I can't even really, he was like a big boss dude in the quantum realm or whatever. And then, now he's not, I don't know. But this, like I said, this version of it where it's like he has the one version of himself that's trying to prevent all the other versions from existing because he knows they're all going to band together and try to take over the multiverse, whether that is through altruistic, methods, right? Does he want to do it because he cares about people, or does he want to do it because he wants to be the only Kang, right? Who knows? But either way, I think it's an interesting setup for that character. But I mean, I think that's kind of a theme with a lot of the characters in this show, right? Where there's sort of these multiple personalities, multiple lives, that kind of thing. Because when you think about everybody in the TVA having either another, lifetime out there on a different timeline or another potential lifetime, that really gives a lot of depth to all their characters, and it really kind of gives you a lot of sympathy for all their characters too, because especially the ones that know and accept it, now there's that kind of internal wrestling, right? Where it's like, I could just go and try to find that life and live it, or do I stick with the TVA and do what I can here, even though I'm kind of working for a sham organization? Can we still do some good, right? We see the different responses to that among different members of the TVA.
Well, I think what's interesting is that nobody even knows what the right thing to do at this point in time is, because until you discover the motivations behind the TVA's creation, you can't possibly understand. And that there is this conflict that's happening right now, and that's what plays out over the course of this show. It's why we see some members of the TVA going rogue and like bombing all of these other timelines out of existence. They're aggressively pruning them because that was their original mandate. And there is a crisis of basically time itself starting to fall apart because the machinery is not designed to handle this many timelines, which is Ouroboros's main concern. With fixing, like hot wiring the machinery so that it can actually deal with this, because it was never intended to be used this way. So you see some people trying to save the main timeline in the way that they were trained and the way they know how, but we don't know if that's the ethical thing to do, right?
Right. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of develops. And like, please don't drop the ball here. Like this, it's a good start. It's a good start. I just want it to continue to be good, I mean, if you remember, Secret Invasion had it wasn't the greatest start, but there was a little bit of promise there. There was a glimmer of hope for kind of a cool Samuel L. Jackson spy thriller kind of thing. And that was not quite delivered on, to put it nicely. So please, Loki, be good.
I think what will save this, Doa, and why it can't possibly be as bad as Secret Invasions, famous last words, is that this is fun. in a way that Secret Invasion was not. Secret Invasion was extremely serious. It had, I mean, hilariously, this has more massive consequences, obviously, than Secret Invasion ever did. Secret Invasion was about one world and the battle for one world, which was Earth, whereas this is a battle for the entire multiverse. So it is kind of funny that this feels less serious because of the tone of the show and the way that, you know, the humor that is built into it. But there really wasn't anything funny about Secret Invasion. There wasn't anything lighthearted. There wasn't anything that was feel-good entertainment. And so it had to live or die by the dramatic stakes of the show. And the dramatic stakes of the show were just done terribly. And almost, it was almost, I mean, it wasn't almost, it was intentionally, it was unintentionally hilarious, right? It was hilarious for all of the wrong reasons.
Your own big arms and things. And, it was,
by the end, it was just,
I don't know.
It was just a shit show. So the thing about the thing about Loki, which makes me at least somewhat encouraged, is that there is a tongue-in-cheek nature of fun to this show. It is intentionally and successfully comedic, and with the actors they have, they will be able to carry. Like the thing about Secret Invasion is that the villains were all terrible actors in that show, and so was Gaia. Whereas the trio of characters that they put most on the screen so far, in Tom Hiddleston, Ke Huy Quan, and Owen Wilson, have been awesome, like really good. And
it reminds me a little bit of Good Omens. Did you ever watch the TV version of Good Omens, the Neil Gaiman one? That was another one. Great, David Tennant, and why am I blanking on the other main character? Either way, very well acted, but also that sort of like quirky approach to very serious topics, you know, which I've always enjoyed, right? Because that, honestly, to me, that feels more like real life. When you're in situations that are like extremely serious and all that, oftentimes people get a little bit quirky and silly because there's this sense that you don't really know how to react to this because you're just not, most people just aren't put together in a way to function normally in, you know, an intense situation like that. So things do get a little bit weird, you know? So when I see things like this, you know, there's that element of discomfort to it, and it feels more true, you know, to humanity, I guess. Maybe I'm getting too philosophical there, but that's my experience anyway with it. And that's one of the things I like about these types of shows. So I'm on board with the tone 100%.
Yeah. I think it's been really enjoyable so far. And yes, there are inevitably going to be plot holes within this show because of the time travel and because of the complicated nature of everybody traveling to different timelines, as well as locations and the number of characters that are interacting. But it just feels good to watch this show. I found myself quite entertained and laughing along the entire time, which is much more than I can say about most of the other shows that we've reviewed and discussed.
Maybe laughing, but not for the right reasons, you know? Yeah. I did find myself laughing in Secret Invasion quite a bit. You know, kiss the scroll moment. You know, what can you say? A moment that will live in infamy. But let's talk episode 2 a little bit, because we watched the first 2 episodes so far. That's what's been released at the time of this recording on the 14th of October. In the year of our Lord 2023. I decided to go all old school with the description of the date there for some reason. My only thing is, the intro of X5 was a little bit odd because I felt like that is a character we were supposed to know about. We just didn't. I went back and looked it up even because I was like, did I like miss this character somewhere? And he's not in season 1 that I can tell. The way they introduced him was in such a way that I felt like I should know who this is because everybody else seemed to, but I just had no idea. And as the episode went on, they kind of explained his backstory and who he was and all that. He was this hunter that was sent after Sylvie that decided to just stay in his timeline and become a movie star, which was kind of a neat story, but they could have kind of led with that instead of being like, oh yeah, let's go get this guy. And then having the audience being like, who? Because I think I was watching it with my wife, and she and I watched Loki season 1 as well, and we were both like, "Who is this character?" You know, we both felt like we should know who he was, but didn't. So that was a bit confusing. But that's kind of my only gripe so far about the show is just the introduction of that character. Once you got kind of used to him, he was saying some pretty effectively hurtful things in a way that I was like, wow, okay, he's pretty. They're like, he's a good talker, and I'm like, okay, I've heard that before, but it's like, wow, he really does know how to push people's buttons. That was some decent dialogue, I thought.
Yeah, and I think it's really successful because this show is relying on its dialogue and really extended scenes that show characters, whether it was the like funny time travel scene where Loki's snapping in and out with Ouroboros in episode 1, or whether it's the torture scene where they're just repeatedly talking to it's Owen Wilson and Loki in with X5. Brad.
Because the episode is called Breaking Brad.
Of course
like,
it is.
Oh, okay, yeah. I also
Raphael Cassell is his name.
Oh, okay.
But
way to go, Raphael. I didn't like the chase scene though when they were chasing him down. I was like, all right, I want to get back to the dialogue, honestly. Let's get around to it.
It could have been a little bit shorter, especially because obviously Loki could use his mischief magic to instantly capture him, which I enjoyed when they did that at the very end of it, where he started creating the illusions of the gang members. So I thought that was I'm in favor of action scenes that show unique powers of characters, and I think that was very effective at doing that. But we've also seen Loki do this about 1 million times previously, right?
It took a little bit too long to get there for me.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, okay,
the running around was
we know they're gonna catch
unnecessary.
him.
We could have just gone immediately to that. And
that was definitely somebody being like, we need an action scene. And then, inserted one there. Yeah.
I also do think that the link to him leaving was rather tenuous, because the last time we had seen his character, he was pretty insistent that things be done by the book. And I wish that there was some sort of scene in between, him, that iteration of him, and then him agreeing that he did have a life in a different timeline before he was kind of removed and forced into working for the TVA, and that he had bought into that. This is really reminiscent of obviously the Matrix, and the conversations that happen as to whether you take the blue pill or the red pill, which kind of life you actually want to lead. And I think he rightfully feels that his own life was robbed from him. And I think the confrontation that he has with Mobius about if Mobius is curious about what his life would actually be, and then Mobius admitting to Loki that it shook him up, and that the thing he was most afraid of was that he would see something good and wonder what his life would have been like. So I think it's really effective.
I get it. You might think twice in case it's something bad.
Or something good. Something bad I can handle. What if it's something good? Do you think I want to have that rattling around in here?
There's tons of really good philosophical quandaries that are being posed by this show. And it's fun to see the way all of the different characters are reacting to the vast uncertainty of their situation.
Yeah, like I'm not even convinced that Brad is did the wrong thing by abandoning the TVA and living his living a different life, right? Like
as a movie star, it's a pretty rad life, right?
Yeah, I mean, any TVA member that wants to abandon the TVA and go live a normal life, like I feel like I really can't criticize them too much for that, because it was robbed from them, right? And so you do weigh the burden of the potential burden of responsibility. Can they make a difference? Are they really saving something by staying at the TVA versus these are people who deserve to live the life they want to live too, So I think that's a good question where it's like anyone who leaves the TVA, I can't really blame them. I mean, they have that right. They've earned that. They were kidnapped, right? So they've found out that they've been living a lie. So even as like Brad is being sort of tortured in a box, ever smaller,
really being tortured.
They didn't really hurt him, I suppose. Maybe
they just put him in a
tortured.
smaller and smaller box. They implied he might be squished, but did they squish him?
Yeah.
No.
They squished a little chair. They squished one of those. It kind of looked like one of those bouncing things that Sonic jumps on in the video games. But like, so during the scene, I'm like, I kind of feel bad for Brad a little bit. Obviously, they need the information that he has because he's their ticket to finding Sylvie, right? To find out what happened at the end of time. with He Who Remains. But you know, at the same time, you feel bad for this guy, right? Who's just trying to get out and live his life, you know? And here he is dragged back and tortured and jailed and called a criminal. And I'm like, I don't know if he really deserves all this, you know? So I don't know if I'm saying I'm on Team Brad, but like, I think there's some pretty convincing arguments to being on Team Brad. Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with what he was doing. I mean, he literally wasn't hurting anyone through his actions. Yeah, maybe he had abandoned maybe he had abandoned his post, but basically the reasons behind him doing his job were a lie. So
yeah,
why is he obligated by duty when he was never informed that this was an option for him and that he has been a puppet of a greater power whose intentions we still do not know?
He didn't take on that duty voluntarily, so therefore that he is not bound by that duty, right? I don't think you're bound to fulfill any sort of contract you're coerced into signing, essentially, right? So yeah, Team Brad. He's very
right.
mean.
I mean, he's
a
right.
very mean person when he's talking, but still, he is right. Yeah,
he's right a lot of the time when he's talking about Loki and Mobius. And what I do enjoy, I think. I'm not a big fan, it has to be said, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it's just kind of dumb at the end of the day. But one of the characters that has been the most interesting, maybe I'll say this, probably the most interesting character in Marvel is Loki. Because just like mythologically, I think that the character of Loki in Marvel is very on point with who Loki was in terms of Norse mythology, which is he is a trickster and his motivations sometimes align with the Aesir and the gods, right? And what they're trying to do. But he is also ultimately the trigger for Ragnarok and the downfall of all the gods. But he does do good things from time to time, but he also will have very different goals that sometimes cause a lot of problems. And they do a really good job over the course of Marvel of having him, obviously, like he is at times the main nemesis, like he was in the first Avengers movie, but then he does very helpful things for the Avengers at other points in time. And yet he also will just like vanish with the Tesseract because he wants it. Right. So you can never really count on him. Yeah.
He's very true to the comic Loki, right? Where it's sometimes he's an anti-hero, where sometimes he's on the side of good, sometimes he's on the side of bad. You never quite know, you know, because you never quite know which way he's gonna go. In the Thor movies, the later Thor movies, he's kind of the sidekick to Thor, you know, doing arguably heroic things.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he does have more depth than a lot of the other Marvel characters, which is a low bar to be fair. But you know, it is fun to see him. I don't know if he's the best character, but I can't think of a contesting example at the moment. I will admit that, but I'm not ready to agree with you right now. You know,
look, best is subjective. I think he's the most nuanced character, and he's like the most interesting character. And I think you can see that because they continuously use him throughout all of these movies and TV shows because he's fascinating whenever he's on screen, and Tom Hiddleston fucking rules at playing him.
Yeah. What did you think about one more thing before we move on. Brad calls Mobius a nowhere man. At the end, he just
I don't know what that means.
Saying, you're a nowhere man, you're a nowhere man. I was like, that's a weird thing to say to someone, calling them a nowhere man, because it's like he is somewhere. He's at the TVA, so he's not I'm like, why would he be calling him that? That doesn't make sense. And I'm like, and then I realized, I figured it out, Monty. One of these episodes, I believe, will probably start with, maybe we'll get a scene in the middle of the episode, but probably start with a montage set to the Beatles' Nowhere Man of Mobius doing his mundane sort of life, looking sort of forlornly at his magazine with jet ski stuff, and like, you know, twiddling a pencil, that kind of stuff. And then that's going to be the scene where we kind of see Mobius internally really turning over his role at the TV. There's going to be a moment in the season where Mobius is going to really question his spot in the TVA. Does he want to continue with this, or does he want to go and get that jet ski that he's always wanted to? And that montage of angst, of ennui, as it were, is going to be set to the Beatles' Nowhere Man. They paid for the rights, and so they have to set it up in a way that gets you ready for it. So there we have Brad calling him a nowhere man. I'm calling it now. Get ready for the nowhere man montage. I guarantee you it's coming in an episode or two. We'll go back to this clip later.
I can't
That's my
say
theory.
that you're wrong. Like it does
It
seem
fits the Marvel stuff, doesn't it?
And you do obviously this is setting up an existential crisis for Mobius.
Yes.
You can see the cracks already start to happening. Clearly we're going to see what his life would be like in some sort of alternate
And-
alternate timeline.
What better way to do that than set to a song like Nowhere Man that
It is
musically fits perfectly with the tone of the show?
You're
I'm
not wrong.
calling it now. Get ready for the Owen Wilson Nowhere Man montage. It's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. One thing that I think did fall a little flat to me is Sylvie's motivation. Throughout all of this as an alternate Loki, because she just wants to work at a McDonald's, I think in Oklahoma in the 1980s.
But isn't that quirky and funny?
It's not bad yet. I will tell you that, but it does seem very weird after the incredible ambition of all of these Lokis that I understand happened in season 1, and her ultimate decision to take out He Who Remains at the end of time and cause all of this chaos, that she is suddenly just content with this very small, mundane life.
I feel like if you had seen season 1, you might think slightly differently with that, because as I recall, her kind of singular motivation was to basically just slay everybody at the TVA, because she knew she realized she had been like taken out of life she could have lived and all that. And she was mad about it, and she's a Loki, so she decided to just go and like kill as many people from the TVA as possible. That seemed to be kind of her goal. So ultimately then leading up to killing the person behind the TVA. So in working with Loki and Mobius and all that, she found that like not everybody at the TVA is bad, but she still had her singular motivation of ending the TVA, which she got to the end. She killed the end boss, and I feel like she kind of completed her mission. And so then she felt like she was free to go and live a life that she could have lived, So based on that, I'm not as surprised to see her doing something mundane, because her entire life before that was just killing people essentially. So it seems like, if you want to do a complete 180 from being a merciless, assassin essentially, taking a counter job at McDonald's and just chilling on your pickup truck seems like a decent, choice. So I thought it was okay. I thought it was kind of like to me, it kind of made sense that this is something this character would do. And, episode 2 sponsored by McDonald's. Mobius sitting there. He's like, hey, now we're sitting here eating this delicious meal. And I'm like, oh, delicious, is it? I wonder whose idea was that?
I thought you were setting us up for an ambush. Hell, you were just setting us up for a great meal.
I
didn't know Marvel was so hard up for money, but
I also liked
why not?
the scene where they were listing off all the McDonald's menu items that you could possibly order, and then he references the shake that there's several moments of just this ridiculous product placement, Doa. So one of them is they start listing off all of the menu items. Another one is Owen Wilson declaring that he needs apple pie as soon as he walks into the restaurant. And then he asks X5 about how he could be upset while drinking the delicious milkshake. So they literally just jammed the entire McDonald's menu straight into this show, which, by the way, I don't even know if that menu was historically accurate to that era of McDonald's, and I don't care enough to do the research to find out. But
you know what,
I did find it rather hilarious levels of product placement, where it's not just that they were in this McDonald's, it's that they had to repeatedly mention all of the menu items that were available.
You know what they didn't mention? I didn't hear them mentioning 1980s prices for McDonald's menu items. I didn't hear that. That's what I was missing out on. But I will say this: we're not talking about inflation in Loki, but what I will say this: at least they didn't debase themselves by saying "bing it" yet. You know, at least nobody is binging things from their phone. I'm looking at you, Strange New World season 2. You ended very well. Great show towards the end, but there was a moment where you promoted Bing, and that is unforgivable in my book. You know, I will eat at McDonald's every once in a great while. You know, I think their crispy chicken is pretty decent, to be honest. But man, I will never. Even though Microsoft just successfully bought Blizzard Activision, who I've worked with for many, many years, I'm not ready to say Bing it on the broadcast yet.
You're not a Binger at this point.
I don't know. You know, maybe I've lost work from saying that, but I got to be honest. I got to be real. You know, I'm not binging anything.
Come on, man. They have cutting edge AI for search results right now. And my famous McDonald's hamburger is a quarter pounder with cheese. So please sponsor us, Microsoft and McDonald's. We're doing the work for you already.
Never mind. I love binging things. Have you seen how smart their AI is in finding you the correct McDonald's menu item? I thought I wanted delicious apple pie, but it turns out I want, you know, the entire menu all at once. Everything, everywhere, all at once. So brought it back around. Yep.
The funny part about that is it honestly, if you're old like us, seeing that 1980s McDonald's architecture was nostalgic in a way.
Yeah, I remember that.
We grew up
as a kid
going to McDonald's that looked like that brick building with like the, you know, I think of it more of like with Wendy's with the solarium on the side, you know, those curved glass windows that you could sit under. Mm-hmm. But it was very nostalgic of like 80s and 90s fast food restaurants.
There were great Happy Meals when we were kids. I mean, the Transformers, remember the little Transformers that changed into like the fries and the milkshake? There was one that was a burger. I mean, I do remember those. Like the government and like parents and stuff got really mad about the way toys were being marketed to kids during the 80s and the early 90s. But as a kid in the late 80s and early 90s, I loved it. Give me more He-Man, give me more Transformers and all that. Put that marketing down my throat. I want those toys. I love those cartoons. As a kid, it was a ton of fun. Then the government had to go and ruin it. Oh, the man. Rage Against the Machine, Monty. Bring back half-hour advertisements for TV, for toys and things for kids. That's what I say.
No, thank you. I don't want to deal with the kids. Now that we're both parents, though, you don't want to deal with your kid wanting all that stuff. Anyway,
with kids. She hasn't asked me for anything yet, besides looking at a bottle very intently. She's only 4 months old, but we'll get there. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm curious to see where that goes. I think everything was set up really well in this show. I liked the kind of reveal at the end with Loki with the time stick, you know, hitting the wall of the war room and showing, you know, the faces of He Who Remains as the ultimate architect that nobody can remember because he wiped all their memories of previous iterations of the TVA. I thought that was very well done. There's still the mystery of who hit Loki with the time stick to actually pull him out when he flipped into the other timeline, which I think is something curious that's going to come up, right? Because Loki himself doesn't know exactly why he was saved and able to be pulled out of all the timelines. So they're setting up some really interesting stuff here, and I think it's promising. The difference is between this and other shows is that we've talked about is that this is promising and is currently being done well. The problem with like Secret Invasion and Ahsoka was they set up interesting premises, but the episodes where that was being set up were not interesting themselves. They were boring. They were not created in an entertaining fashion. Whereas this is entertaining both in the present and hopefully also in the future.
I think what you said earlier really kind of like sums it up best for me, where it's just a joy to watch. Like it's funny, the actors are great, the tone is really interesting, the quirkiness is fun,
the writing's super
very
good,
pleasing. It's just fun to watch, you know. And I think it sounds stupid to say, but at the end of the day, we just want shows that are fun to watch, right? How they are fun can differ very greatly from show to show, but that they are fun is essential. Yeah. And that has been missing from time to time.
And it's just the cleverness of the way that they show the timelines as well. So it's very clear. Like, for example, one of the moments that I really enjoyed in this show was before Owen Wilson, you know, went outside in the very ridiculous suit, by the way. I enjoyed how puffy and just stupid that suit was because it's just funny to look at. Like, it's a visual joke, especially when they're talking about how fast he has to move. So the scene is both tense. It's both tense and humorous because of the design choices that they make. But I just enjoyed him writing skin ? In the dust on the side of the computer. It's just a funny moment. But then they use that very intelligently to show that Loki has moved into the future because it's still written on the dust later on. So they're doing a very good job of making sure all these timelines make sense to the viewer, and they're doing it in fun and clever ways.
Yeah. It is interesting to see a show do so well with continuity, where in the micro fashion, right? Where it feels like a lot of shows just either don't care or they count on you to sort of like be enough of a fan that you're going to do whatever research or mental leaps you need to do that I'm going to then need to explain to Monty on the broadcast to make it make sense, right? And this show just does it, which is very refreshing. So thank you, Loki.
Yeah, I do get concerned though that again, one of the problems that we brought up with the MCU is that the more media they release, and especially really important things that are happening, such as, you know, they've set up Kang the Conqueror as the next great Avengers arc. So I am concerned, especially with some of the films, that watching this show becomes a requirement for understanding what goes on in future Marvel films. But at the same time, this has done a very good job of just kind of leading you in, because the way that I want these shows to operate is that they're not essential, but they are additional flavor for what happens in the movie. The movies still have to be comprehensible as a self-contained force, but that they have the flavor.
So what my take on that actually is that, like, I feel like I want to go the other direction, where like the movies are sort of the icing on the cake and the shows are where the real meat of the story is, because I just feel like this 6 to 8 episode streamed version of things is just a better way to tell stories. You just get more time, you don't have to cram too much into a 90-minute to 2-hour time window, right? So I like the big blockbuster movies. I like seeing things on the big screen. I like going to the movie theater, but I just feel like you can tell stories so much better in a series like this.
Yeah, but I just need the movies to be comprehensible without this show. In the same way that Ahsoka was not comprehensible without having seen Rebels and Clone Wars. Like, the way, in my opinion, that extended universes should work, like MCU and Star Wars, is that you should be able to understand, if you just go see Avengers, what the hell is happening and all the character motivations, and that the relationship should make sense, right? And if you want to go deeper, if you want to watch Rebels, if you want to watch Clone Wars, if you want to watch Loki, you can get more out of that experience as a choice, not as a necessity to understand the big storylines.
Well, so then the question is what is an extended universe anymore? What even qualifies as an extended universe, right? Streaming is so mainstream right now, and like that format has become so mainstream that, like, I don't even think you can call streamed shows extended universe anymore. I feel like they're at the same level at this point as the films, right?
No.
We're getting a lot more of that than we are getting films.
Exactly. I think the tentpole films are the things that need to be able to stand alone, and that the streaming television shows, I think that's a choice that I would make, is what I'm saying. That's the choice I would make.
I think that's a totally valid way to look at it. I'm just curious, what do the people who are making this stuff view it as? Do they think of it the same way, right? And like, if I kind of miss when extended universe stuff was books, because I think reading books is kind of cool. But I like all these shows, but I still like books. But so it does bother me a little bit that we don't see a lot of official stuff in book. That's a whole different argument, though. Maybe I'm old. I like to read words on the page,
of course,
physical page.
Well, one of the other questions that I have now, which is, we're going to have to see some sort of resolution on this, is what happens with Jonathan Majors because of his assault allegations.
Oh, what? I haven't even heard of this.
Yeah.
Oh, this is news to me.
Oh boy, Doa's hearing about this in real time.
You won't. I won't make you. Give me the gory details on the show, but I'll have to Google this later. I maybe Bing it, perhaps. Perhaps the AI can correctly tell me about Jonathan Majors' assault allegations. Hey Bing, I got a kind of an awkward question to ask you. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. But yeah, that is, well, I'll say this. Didn't seem to slow down the Flash.
This one seems relatively quite serious. And now from potentially multiple people. And yeah,
it's like that.
Yeah, it's not like that, huh? It's not looking great, but for somebody that has been positioned by Marvel throughout films and TV shows to be the next big villain that the Avengers, I mean, to the degree that it's, you know, it's already known that the future Avengers movies that are coming out in a few years are going to be about Kang. It is in the title of the movies.
Just recast him.
I think you can probably just recast him. But
honestly, if it's as big as it seems like it is, and again, I know nothing about these allegations. This is news to me. But if it is as big as it seems like it is from what you're saying, recast the guy. I mean, I think he did a pretty great job in Loki season 1. You know, I thought he was a compelling actor.
He's a very good actor.
You know, did that performance, right? But that doesn't mean you can't be recast. You know, especially in something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Yeah. I mean, you can be like, oh, he changed his appearance.
Yeah, it seems pretty easy to explain, doesn't it?
It's not hard in Marvel. Yeah, come on. You know, it's I only think it's tragic that Idris Elba has already been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Heimdall, right?
Yeah, they really wasted Heimdall him, didn't they?
They did. He is such an amazing actor, and Heimdall gets so little screen time, and they try to give him a little bit more importance, you know, as time goes on in Thor movies, I guess. But I think he's dead at this point in the MCU. I think he died, but yeah. But yeah, what a great actor, squandered. Imagine him being the big bad of an entire arc. That would be awesome. He can be a very threatening villain if he wants to be. So and he can also be inspiring. As
just
he
look
was
at Stringer Bell in The Wire. I mean, that's where he got his big break, right? He was extremely threatening. Oh yeah, he was. No, Stringer Bell is a villain. He was extremely threatening in The Wire.
Okay.
So
Luther is you know, he's kind of a wild cannon. What do they call him? Loose cannon? Loose cannons? Anyway, what I'm saying is Idris Elba is a great actor, and it's too bad that we only got him as Heimdall and we couldn't have him in a more prominent role in the MCU. I think they didn't know what they had when they cast him as Heimdall way back when. Yeah. They didn't know what an amazing actor they were putting in such a you know, a kind of a mediocre role, you know. I mean, he's a cool Heimdall.
All right. Well, I think that we've covered the first couple of episodes now of Loki. We will be coming back to this show as we usually do as a few more episodes are released. We are going to do something different for next week, which is in honor of Halloween. We're going to take a slight deviation from our normal MO, which is fantasy and sci-fi. And we are choosing to extend this into supernatural, which we kind of have to do for Halloween. But they have released, Netflix has released The Fall of the House of Usher, which is not just, as I understand it, based on that story by Edgar Allan Poe, but also from other works by Edgar Allan Poe. So they're trying to incorporate a variety of different Poe stories into the kind of plots of individual episodes or themes of individual episodes. I'm a Poe fan. I'm super intrigued by this. So because it is more supernatural in nature, and also it's made by Mike Flanagan, who did The Haunting of Hill House, which I think is incredibly good.
I haven't seen it yet.
I know. I think it's one of the best pieces of horror that has been made in recent memory. It was really, really excellent. And I was watching at the same time that I was watching Ari Aster's Hereditary, which is another one of my, I think those two in particular have done a very good job of creating unsettling horror that isn't really reliant on jump scares, but is just deeply disturbing psychologically.
So actual horror is what you're telling me.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it sounds good.
The Haunting of Hill House, there is one jump scare in the entirety of that series, and it's kind of a dumb moment, if I'm being honest. But for those of you who know The Haunting of Hill House, episode 5 of that show I think is one of my favorite episodes of television ever. And if you know the one, if you know the one, you know the one. If you've seen that show,
I'm gonna watch it.
It's really good. So I'm excited by this.
I am also a bit of a Poe fan. I read a lot over the years, so it excites me that I had heard that they're incorporating multiple of his short stories into the show, where it's like, all right, great, give me Mask of the Red Death. That's probably my favorite one. Give me a pit and a pendulum. Kind of a dorky story if we're honest, but it's still a cool visual, right? We can get there. Telltale Heart. I don't know, but we can be sure there'll be lots of ravens. That's for sure.
So
And
a
we
lot
can
of
say
them,
things like that's so Raven.
a lot of the episodes are named after stories.
Oh.
Or there is
really?
the last episode's called The Raven. One of the episodes called The Pit and the Pendulum, Telltale Hearts,
Oh.
Mask of the Red Death. They don't have my favorite,
Oh.
which is the Cask of Amontillado, which is my favorite Poe
Oh.
short story. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We are going to go into the supernatural on this one.
I think it qualifies.
We're choosing that it qualifies.
I never want to do just a drama on this show. I would never want to do like Breaking Bad, even though that show is amazing. But there's no supernatural element to it. I think we draw the line that there has to be supernatural, right?
Fair enough.
Unless we're talking about Walter White's supernatural pizza throwing skills, you know, that maybe that does qualify. Now that I think about it, all right, we'll have that discussion later, though.
Yeah, and we will get into more Loki. And Doa has surfaced the fact that there is a Godzilla show coming to Apple TV.
Yeah, I can't believe we didn't know that.
With Kurt Russell. So I guess we're going to do that. It's called what's it called? Monarch.
Legacy of Monsters, which is a terrible name for a show. All right, let's just, before we close, can we just have a short little discussion about names for things? Can we agree that Legacy is just stricken from the show record? Like, we can't use Legacy in titles anymore. None of that stuff. And the big one, I am hereby proposing a moratorium on the phrase "rise of" for TVs and movies for at least 100 years. We've used our quota in the last 5 years, probably. So I think we can just get by without Rise of anything for a long, long time. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Rise of Skywalker, Rise of the Beasts. Those beast Transformers were barely even in that movie.
You watched that movie?
I did. I did, because my little brother Carl, who watches this show, by the way, hi Carl, is a big Transformers fan. So we went and we know how Transformers movies are, but we also really like to make fun of movies, so it's a good excuse. It was a good excuse to do it. I will say, Bumblebee was pretty decent, though. Out of all the Transformers movies, Bumblebee was actually pretty good. Everything else, kind of trash. Sorry, Marky Mark. It's true.
All right. Well, we'll do all 8 episodes of The House of Usher in a very rushed show, giving our overall impressions next week. Until then.